Let's do a shelfie now with Matthew Diener, CEO of Screen Producers Australia, and someone who is a great advocate of the film industry in Australia. Welcome, Matthew.
Welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. Now, I read a speech you wrote recently. You delivered last year, I think, for Screen Forever, 2019, and you used the word oligopsony.
Yes.
Oligopsony.
Yes. So that is a word to describe a market condition where there are a number of purchasers, or a handful of purchasers in the market, and many potential people who might be wanting to sell to that market. So we look at that and look at the screen industry as being in that structure, and it's the same sort of structure as the food and beverages industry, actually, if you think about it, because many people might want to put up a stall in front of their homes and sell lemonade, but in order to make that business really work, you've got to sell to Coles and Woolworths, and that creates a big market.
And they're an oligopsony.
Well, yeah, they are an oligopsony, that's right. And you've sort of, I think, we've heard of the stories of milk suppliers being given a hard yard by various structures within Coles and Woolworths over the years. That's kind of the same situation that a lot of screen creators have when they're dealing with commercial networks, now the big streaming services. So you end up with a power imbalance that describes that market and the consequence,
I read today that Netflix is putting up its monthly subscription from $9.99 to $10.99.
Oh, is that right?
Do we know how many Australian subscribers they have?
I think they're at about 50% penetration of households, and therefore that it's quite a large number. It means one in two of us have got access to Netflix, and I think about 70% overall are subscribing to those streaming services, and maybe 40% have got two subscriptions at once. So it's a big business. A lot of people using it.
I'm just trying to do the sums. That's 70 million a month. In Australia alone, 70 million a month. Now, we need to see more Australian content from these streamers.
Yeah, I mean, they're becoming such a big cultural delivery point for all of the things we do. If we step back for a minute, we've got, as time's gone by, we've been entertained and absorbed content and read books and gone to, plays, and there's all these sort of things that have happened in our lives. And increasingly, we are huddled around the hearth of the flickering screen, either in our hands or in our laptops or whatever it is. That is the cultural impact that we have for the community. These services are great. They have an access for many people to watch a lot of good things. But they, your point about the amount of money they can make, that is money that is, it's cream, really, because there's no need for them to have infrastructure like broadcasters traditionally have had, or your Foxtels or others that have had to lay down infrastructure, people employ, all those sort of things. This is money that you can make without having to do any investment. And so it's a very difficult business model to compete against if you're another supplier. But you also don't have any obligations legally or otherwise to be contributing to the local community or cultural, environment in which we create content for other people.
And we're seeing federal governments reducing the Australian content on even free-to-air. It's a concern, Matthew. It must be a concern for your producers.
Look, it's a big concern because you end up, of course, there's a vested interest these people have, and like people I represent and people who work in the creative industries have, because, of course, it's about whether they have jobs and whether they can put, food on the table and then pay the mortgages and all those sort of things. But I think that, generally speaking, the people I know and the people you probably know that work in creative industries are starting from the point of view of having made a decision that they want to deliver something really impactful to the community. They've foregone maybe more orthodox careers that might deliver them a regular paycheck, and they're kind of taking a risk about that because they want to live a life fulfilled sort of thing. So they're passionate about the idea that we don't leave the planet without contributing something meaningful and powerful to the communities in which they are living. And I think that what they're therefore driven by is the idea that they can, people all are connected by these stories and storytelling and creative, the power of creativity. And that this becomes something that is meaningful for everyone to be there to follow.
You said, did you see Tenet, Matthew?
I haven't yet, no, because I haven't yet gone to a cinema for a long time, and I don't know. I think that South Australia is one of the very
of
good on it,
course,
but
yes.
it's open, and I think you can get into. I'm in Sydney at the moment. You can get into cinemas, but I haven't yet seen it. So, but it's got it's. I think I saw the reviews. Seems to be doing reasonably well, but Wonder Woman is the next thing coming through, and it seems to be doing better. So these big tentpole movies are doing big business, and it's kind of the thing that's taking a lot of eyeballs away.
You said in that speech, at our heart is storytelling and necessary human experience. Now, tell me about the books in your life, Matthew.
Well, look, that's interesting you should ask that. I mean, when I was growing up, and I grew up, I was born in Sydney, and I grew up in Tasmania, and then moved to Adelaide to study at university before I went overseas. And I've had a different relationship with different books over that period. When I was younger, I had British parents, and I sort of liked books like Serve Them All My Days, which was sort of books around schools and that kind of experience of English world. But then as I've grown, I started to embrace the kind of community in which I was living more and more. I think that might have been the shift between going from your parental guide to the kind of environment in which you're in and the friends. So for me, growing up, you're going to laugh at this, probably the impactful books that I remember as a kid were things like Dot and the Kangaroo, if you can remember that, which then became an animation that you're engrossed in. And then as I grew up, then it became, listening and reading books through school and My Place and other things like that. And then the two books that I thought were worth reflecting on was Solstice, which I don't know if you remember this, but there was a guy in my law class at Adelaide University, a gentleman called Matt Rubenstein, who...
say the name again?
Matt Rubenstein.
Oh, the writer, yes.
The writer. And who wrote Solstice, which was turned into a play for Barry Kosky's 96 festival.
Yes.
So this was an experience for me of seeing something that I had, the idea that having, you kind of go through different shifts in your own experience in life, and
that's right.
You see that someone can deliver something that is a book, which was mind-blowing, to then have that translated into a play at the youthful age of 20, whatever he was, at that age, and then have that received as well as Solstice was.
He was the son of Gillian Rubinstein, who was a children's writer, and she also wrote under another name, another nom de plume. I can't think of the name of it. But anyway, yes, she was a fine writer too. I remember this book, yes.
Yeah, look, and so for me, that was where, it allowed that sense of belief that not only am I observing, changing the shifting ideas for being this British sort of idea to something more in my own environment, to then seeing how someone I knew could create something and be creative. And at that point, I think I was going to be a lawyer, and I'm still leaning towards a sort of more of a legal background. But the idea that you could then build and be accepted and do all of those things was very powerful. And the other book that I really responded to was Cloud Street, which I think a lot of Australians did. But that was an example also of a book that became a very powerful example of what television in this country could deliver, because I was at that stage working for the subscription television industry, and I watched Foxtel, which invested heavily in that miniseries translating the book.
Of Cloud Street, yes.
Of Cloud Street, using a South Australian director guy called Matthew Saville. So anyway, that's a couple of examples of, it's probably a very random smorgasbord of books that I was thinking about that have kind of left different impressions on me. But there's something that changed the way I interpreted the landscape, courtesy of Tim Winton, which I think is true of a lot of different people.
Oh, well, of course. And I mean, it's a masterpiece. I've always thought it was, and he agrees, that it's Patrick White light, Cloud Street. But it is a very, very potent and beautiful novel. and I think preferable to his later works, which one rather tires of unshaven middle-aged man sitting in a ute looking out to sea in Western Australia, Matthew.
Yeah, they become a bit the same. There's descriptions of country that become, valuable. But there's something about the way we did. You've talked about the conference that I gave a speech at, which is a conference we put on each year. But I think the year before we had Leah Purcell do we call it the Hector Crawford speech at the conference, named after Hector Crawford, who Crawford's a very famous production company. It really drove and he pushed for the idea that we should have Australian stories on Australian screen.
He started Australian television really or production in a church hall in Melbourne with George Anderson, late of Flinders University.
Oh, right. See, I don't know that part of his life. I know the part where he's successful, but I don't know the origin story. He
went into Homicide and Division 4 and all that, Matlock.
Well, and in the 60s, it was him leading, I think, the actors and the faces that into really a discussion with government, which is kind of similar to what we're at the moment, to say to both sides of government, we needed to have some regulation on our industry, or else we weren't going to have any, Australian content for anyone to watch. But the person who gave that speech a couple of years ago was Leah Purcell, and she has just completed The Drover's Wife, the legend of Morley Johnson, and that is based around a short story, Henry Lawson, and then she's adapted that into a play, and that's now become it will become a film, and it will, I think, eventually become a television series. And in that speech, she described how Indigenous people, when you kill a kangaroo, you use every single part of it, and it's the same when you're dealing with IP creation, a story like that, a story like Cloud Street, a story like Dot and the Kangaroo, the extraction of value of each part. Let's kind of see if we can turn into a play and a book and a cartoon, and that very, very valuable idea of using the asset that you've created as many times as possible.
And other books, Matthew?
Look, well, the latest book, this sounds... I've been downloading, because I responded very sadly in some ways to Clive James's departure last year. Yes. I actually started downloading on my Kindle all of his, or many books that I hadn't realised he'd written, because he'd written and become very prolific in his later years. So I wanted to go back over his catalogue effectively, and also sort of see it through the lens of someone who was no longer, I suppose, really of this country. Yes. And it set up for me as well in the creative industries the problem or the challenge and the tension between people that originate from Australia, are born and raised in a certain way, and hit success, and then don't necessarily have that, maybe at various points have touched points back to Australia, but maybe aren't contributing to the creative community as much as you would want them to. And I wouldn't necessarily describe Clive James as in that bucket necessarily, but he certainly lived an English life for pretty much from the 80s. And there's a cabal of Australians over there. But I'm thinking about the current environment which we're in, and we've had a lot of Australians over the years move to Los Angeles, because it's really where the film and television industry is as a base. For a lot of people, it's where you can get access to the best, most expensive, and much money, all that sort of talent. So you end up losing them to very large films. And one of the opportunities at the moment we've got in our industry, and is, in some ways the demise a little bit of where America has been sitting, and the difficulty of working in Los Angeles, there is an opportunity not only to make sure we have our own story streets on screen, but to build more of, I think we'll see a decentralised, as we are probably in our work-life balance in our own communities, there's a sort of decentralisation going on. And maybe the opportunity to bring a lot of those creative talents back to Australia. It's certainly flocking back at the moment. And so, it's kind of you see it come full circle. Now that, it's a narrative around where I thought Clive James, he was in a situation where he couldn't come home to pass away. That was one of those sad things. And possibly if there'd been an opportunity before that, there would have had been back in the country and contributing. So that's where I would like to see some of our creative talents having broader opportunities in our own market to deliver, whether it's for the globe or whether it's for local audiences, the opportunities here.
I loved his unreliable memoirs.
Yes.
Until I learnt that it was all completely made up.
Made up.
Yes. And he said, well, it is called Unreliable Memoirs. But it was essentially a novel. It had nothing to do with his own life.
He had such a turn of phrase, the way he described. I said I was brought up in Tasmania, and he was born in Sydney, and he describes the way Sydney Harbour works and it is, and the type of light and all of those things. Yes, you're right. He's writing to an English, probably at that point an English audience, isn't he? About a sort of fictional sort of, or partly fictional sort of world in which he operates. It's the idea, probably at that point in the psyche of the British, they wanted to see Neighbours, an idealised nature of Australia through this kind of life. But we don't. I think what we've evolved from that has become something different. And what I'm, interested in is, and it's starting to come through, in the type of storytelling that we're embracing on the screen. But we're embracing language and culture from our own depths. We're plumbing our own depths more than we've ever done. So that's kind of the...
And what do you read, Matthew Diener, CEO of Screen Producers Australia, what do you read to relax?
Look, I rarely read, if I'm being completely honest with you, I will rarely read to relax. I find that in order to kind of switch my brain off, I will go to music and I will go to light entertainment on television, but I will use... When I'm on holidays, I will take a book with me and use that opportunity to downplay. And Leanna Moriarty is the person who's written recently, and there's a Nine Perfect Strangers is apparently filming. I keep on titling everything back to a film and television series, but that would be the kind of, I will pick up a book like that and I'll use it as an opportunity to read, or I'll what I sometimes often do, and maybe people relate to this, but if you go and stay in an Airbnb or a house, you'll trawl through someone's book collections and you'll pick something out. And otherwise what I'm doing is I'm reading a lot from my work, and I'll choose the opportunity to switch off completely from that, just to kind of almost look at someone, maybe I spy on someone else's life and pull out the book.
That's always lovely.
And Leanna Moriarty's books are the ones that I read most recently, actually, we had a little holidays before they shut the border down in Queensland, and I read that at the Airbnb I was at. And
we're being reminded that Gillian Rubinstein's nom de plume for her adult books was Leanne Hearn. Yes, I'd forgotten that. Matthew, thank you for coming on. I'm sure we'll speak with you again in your role as CEO of Screen Producers Australia. Good luck.
I hope so. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming on, Matthew.
You're very welcome. No problem.